In today's video, we are going to be comparing Combat Patrol and Spearhead against each other. A lot of people are talking about why Spearhead is better than Combat Patrol, but no one is really quantifying it or giving concrete examples. So we are going to go over all the different steps, phases, and rules, and going to compare both of them head to head. If you enjoyed the content, consider leaving a thumbs up and subscribing, as well as checking the links down in the description below if you want to join us over on Discord or support the channel. So the first thing that you are commonly going to compare when it comes to two formats is army selection. And army selection in Spearhead and Combat Patrol is very, very similar. You go to a Warhammer or LGS, you pick up your box, and then you start assembling and playing. That's basically it. The only big difference between the two is that Combat Patrols are a little bit more expensive than Spearheads. But when it comes to the quality of the plastic, the number of miniatures, it is really more faction dependent than it is dependent on whether you're buying a Spearhead or a Combat Patrol box. So in that regard, both are actually identical outside of a small price difference. Next up, we are going to be talking about army customization, and this one goes a little bit into missions and secondaries, simply because in Combat Patrol, obviously you pick your enhancements for your leader choice or for your general, and then you're picking secondary objectives to spice the game up a little bit and to not just play primary objectives. Meanwhile, in Spearhead, you are going to be picking a battle trait if there's a choice to be had there, and then you are going to be picking regiment abilities as well as enhancements for your leader choice. Your general there has a few more options than is common in Combat Patrol. In Combat Patrol, you usually have 2. In Spearhead, you usually have 4 of them. It really depends on the faction though. And you just have more options in general that are not dependent on the mission, but rather on making your army cooler. And I think that is the better concept moving forward. So I think that the fixed secondary objectives that you basically pick from, the choice between A or B, should be gone away with, and instead you should only pick army customization things that make your entire faction or box a little bit cooler. And I think it would be cool to have across the board 3 major options or choices, each of them offering you between 2 and 4 choices or options, and then you have your own army that is a little bit more individual than what you get currently in Spearhead and Combat Patrol, but not so individual that it is overwhelming for new players. Next up, we are going to be talking about board size, because board sizes are different between Combat Patrol and Spearhead. And this might be controversial, but I would highly prefer if Combat Patrol retained its board size of 44 by 30 inches. Meanwhile, Spearhead is obviously played on a kill team or warcry sized board. That means the size is 22 by 30 inches. And while that works for Spearhead, because Age of Sigmar inherently is a more melee focused game, I feel like a more range focused game like Warhammer 40k would strongly benefit from a little bit of a bigger map and more terrain and a little bit more maneuverability here or there instead of being able to charge on turn 1. I feel like that is something that highly benefits Spearhead. It makes the game shorter because you charge turn 1, the game only has 4 turns, but I really feel like the 40k equivalent of Combat Patrol would really benefit from another turn, adding maybe 15 minutes to a game, but then having a little bit more maneuverability and more ways to kind of position yourself, shoot a little bit, and then get into melee. So as far as board sizes goes, there's really no right or wrong here. It really depends on whether you want to have the shortest game possible, or if you want to have a little bit more options when it comes to moving around the table, having a little bit more options when it comes to placing your own terrain and so on. And it's really a thing of preference. As I said, I think it works for Spearhead that the board is so small because the game goes really, really quick and you get into the action immediately. But I don't think that is necessary for Combat Patrol. I really think that Combat Patrol could make use of a 5th turn and instead offer a little bit more maneuverability and offer a little bit more objective play when it comes to the game as a whole. So here your preferences would be very interesting to hear, whether you prefer the smaller board size simply because you don't have tables big enough and so on. All of that stuff would be interesting to hear, so definitely drop them down in the comments below. Next up, we are going to be talking about missions and secondaries, and here Spearhead has Combat Patrol beat by almost any metric. So in Combat Patrol, you pick your secondary objectives via your Combat Patrol, so they are in the PDF there. As you can see here, you have a choice between A or B, or default or optional, and it's basically it. And then you pick between 1 of 5 or 4 missions, and then you play that one, that is your primary. And while these missions make it easy for you to understand how primary works and where the deployment zones are, you still have to figure out terrain, how to place it correctly, and so on. Meanwhile, in Spearhead, placing terrain is already part of the game structure. You just have to pick between board A and board B, depending on how you want your objectives to be laid out, basically. And then you have your decks. And these decks not only serve as a way to score victory points and to score basically secondary objectives, but they also serve as a way to use quote-unquote command points or command strategies. And you just, if you can't score that particular objective, why not use it for a bonus and heal your hero by up to D6 HP? And that helps you across the game. And that is something that keeps you on your toes over and over again, and that keeps even the same game with the same two boxes a little bit more fresh, a little bit more interesting than it does in Combat Patrol, where the only thing that you're really changing is a little bit of a different deployment zone and a little bit of a different primary, but that's basically it. I feel like for Spearhead, it works that it is so quick. You just pick long or short edge deployment, you place your terrain, your opponent places 2 pieces, you place 2 pieces, and you start playing, you draw from the deck, and you get into it very, very quickly. Meanwhile, in Combat Patrol, you could argue that you could keep it a little bit more complex by retaining the missions and the missions adding cards to your decks. So the primary way to scoring could be retained the same. That wouldn't be a problem. But as far as secondaries go, there really needs to be a deck that keeps you on your toes, that is basically very similar to what tactical objectives are in regular 40k, and I think that would be a nice way to balance things out and to give Combat Patrol its own identity, because what we don't want is Combat Patrol to just be Spearhead in 40k. That would be not ideal, because 40k has different needs than Age of Sigmar does. Another thing I wanted to talk about really quick is the who goes first thing. Whenever I uploaded my first thoughts video on Spearhead, I kind of voiced the concern that going first in Spearhead has a major benefit for 3 out of 4 factions, I would say, and it is more or less skewing the win rate by, I would assume, 10%. If you are playing a ranged faction, a faction that has very fast models and so on, you can screen your opponent off of objectives, you can just run on those objectives, you don't even need to charge, and you basically won the first 2 turns of holding objectives for free by just starting the game. The biggest benefit the defender gets, in my opinion, is that the defender gets to pick the regiment ability after the attacker does. So you can counterplay a little bit if your army is capable of doing that. If not, the trade-off between attacker and defender is not fair, in my opinion, and needs a little bit of changing. In Combat Patrol, meanwhile, that doesn't matter too much because the bot size is significantly bigger. There should be more terrain on the table, so you should have enough terrain to hide your units behind, to get cover and so on. And there, the first turn, while still impactful, is not as oppressive as it is in Spearhead. That is at least my opinion on this entire thing. So, and again, this goes hand in hand with secondary objectives, primary objectives, board size, and going first just needs a little bit of a tweak for Spearhead that makes it a little bit more interesting to go second, where you get a little bit of an additional boost than what you already get, as you can see here on the reference sheet, where it perfectly outlines what the defender gets and what the attacker gets. And I just think that being the defender and in 90% of the cases going second is not really worth it. Another thing that Spearhead has done a little bit better, and that's just a thing of additional work for the designers, is that they have tailor-made rules for Spearhead. So the army abilities or regiment abilities and so on are tailor-made and changed and tweaked a little bit for Spearhead specifically. We had a similar thing in Combat Patrol, but there it was just minor tweaks, like for example at the beginning of the edition, where you had Oath of Moment, it applied to wounds and hit rolls. In Combat Patrol, it only applied to hit rolls, and they called it a day. Where that works, it felt a little bit lazy, and there could have been done a little bit more something interesting there, instead of just, you know, using the army rule that already exists, cutting it in half, and calling it a day for Combat Patrol. I feel like there's a little bit more possibility and flexibility there, even if the transition from Spearhead and Combat Patrol to the full game basically takes a little bit longer at that point. I think it's definitely a worthy trade-off to make the format itself, Combat Patrol or Spearhead, more balanced, more fun, more interactive, than it is to make the transition for the player easier to the full game. It should be coming second or third in line when it comes to designs, and instead make the game more fun. And another rule that I really liked in Spearhead, and that I really think that the Combat Patrol designers could make use of in Combat Patrol, is the reinforcements rule. Not only does the reinforcements rule incentivize strategic play, tactical movement and so on, because you usually want to try to cut down units that have the reinforcements rule to 1 or 2 models and then ideally retreat and so on, to not allow your opponent to get their reinforcements back, because it gives them a strategic advantage. They can reposition themselves a little bit at least, and they get their entire unit back. Now, obviously, reinforcements don't apply to all the units. You need to have the little red arrow at the top right of your datasheet or war scroll, and at that point, you can reinforce that unit, so whenever it dies, you can resurrect it once per game. And that's how it works. It's a brilliant mechanic. It really helps spearheads that have a lower model count maybe, or that just have very squishy units, and that need that little bit of extra help or a little bit of a boost to get units back on the table once something happens. And I think this would be very, very useful for Combat Patrol as well, because as you know, some Combat Patrols are just tiny, squishy. Looking at Adaptor's Mechanicus, as always, especially the new one, that one could reinforce the entire box and it would still be balanced, in my opinion. So definitely GW designers make use of that in Combat Patrol because it's an excellent rule, not only strategically and tactically, but also from a gameplay perspective and from a fun perspective. So what do I think is going to happen with Combat Patrol moving forward? Are there going to be any changes during 10th edition? I highly doubt it, although we are only 1 year into 10th edition, so maybe, I don't know, maybe summer next year there's going to be something similar than what is currently happening to boarding actions, where we get an entire new book, similar to what Spearhead got with Fire and Jade, where they basically rebalance all the different rules, all the different Combat Patrols that are active in 10th edition, and where they take a look at the rules and tweak them a little bit and make it a little bit more exciting. Is that a realistic prospect? I would probably rate the likelihood here very, very low. But what is definitely going to happen is a rework for Combat Patrol in 11th edition. And I think there GW is going to learn a lot from Spearhead, and they are going to make all of the changes that they have learned from Spearhead and some of the ones that I discussed here with reinforcements and so on, and implement them into Combat Patrol. Now, as I said, I hope they retain the slightly bigger board size, and I hope they are going to add more customization to your army to add a little bit more replayability value of your specific Combat Patrol box, and I hope that they are going to give you more options to play the game without being overwhelming and making it a little bit more interesting for casual tournaments, because a lot of stores are smaller and they don't have a lot of space, and their Combat Patrol and Spearhead come in clutch, simply because you don't need a lot of space, you don't need a lot of miniatures, games are relatively quick if both players know what they are doing, approximately an hour, and I think that's the perfect format for especially smaller LGSs and stores. So let's support that kind of gameplay style outside of Kill Team and Warcry. Those still exist, obviously, but I still think that there is a distinct space and design space between Kill Team and Combat Patrol and Warcry and Spearhead. Now, Spearhead doesn't have a lot of flaws, at least currently. The balancing is okay. Now that we've had a lot of time to play with all the different Spearheads, it has been revealed that the balancing is not perfect. Most of the games are very close, but some Spearheads do seem to be lacking, and we are going to go over them in other reviews. There are going to be playlists linked down in the pinned comment here if you want to check out the Spearhead and the Combat Patrol playlist. I've done reviews on a lot of Combat Patrols, and a lot of Spearhead reviews are coming up, so definitely consider subscribing for that. And then there's obviously going to be more stuff for Spearhead, because they don't need to iterate too much on the rules, and I really don't think they're going to, at least not in the current edition, or at least not for the first couple of years. But as far as releases go, they have a very easy time to expand and make Spearhead a little bit more of a flexible and replayable format by just releasing more of these kinds of boxes. Different cardboard boards that have different layouts on primary objectives, different decks with secondary objectives and commands on them, and new terrain pieces to support that new board and the secondary objectives and so on that are on there. Now, one thing that I would find really cool, but that is probably something more geared towards 5th edition, would be that Spearheads contain their own faction-specific terrain for Spearhead. That would be cool. You just kind of increase the price of a Spearhead to Combat Patrol level and then include 2 pieces of terrain, one bigger one, one smaller one that's faction-specific. That would be really, really damn cool, especially if it has some of its own rules maybe, or if it's just a visual design thing. That would be just a smaller idea from my side that I would personally really like, because it adds a lot of flair on the table. But with that, GW has nearly endless ways to expand Spearhead. Now, obviously, they are going to release more Combat Patrols and more Spearhead boxes, and that is going to keep the entire scene and the formats fresh for a little while. But I feel like adding new terrain pieces, new decks, and so on, more secondary objectives, would definitely keep the game alive for a lot longer than what we've currently seen with Combat Patrol, where fatigue set in approximately a year later, even though the format is still highly played, because a lot of people say that no one's playing Combat Patrol, but honestly, whenever I look here in my local area, there are Combat Patrol tournaments at almost all times. There are always between 8 and 16 players there. Whenever I was abroad, I could always play a Combat Patrol tournament with the small box of miniatures that I had with me, and it always worked out. So Combat Patrol, definitely not a dead format, but definitely a format that needs to learn from Spearhead and needs a lot of changes to be more interesting, more interactive, and just a better game in general. If you have any thoughts of your own, if you agree or disagree with me, drop all of that in the comments below. Give a thumbs up or down, depending on if you like the video or not. And then we are going to talk in the comments down below. As always, check out the links down in the description below if you want to support the channel, or join us over on Discord for a more in-depth discussion. And yeah, if there are any Spearhead reviews or Combat Patrol reviews you would like me to cover, definitely drop that in the comments below as well. And with that, I hope this video was insightful, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you so much for listening. Take care.